It's now been over a century since stagecoaches moved across the American frontier, yet their story still amazes people today. We often hear about how they helped settle the West, but the true experience of riding one has shocked even historians. Stagecoaches are often shown in movies and old stories as adventurous and exciting, but the truth was very different. They carried people, gold, and important messages, but also came with serious risks. Passengers faced rough rides, harsh weather, attacks, and even death. Personal journals and eyewitness accounts from that time reveal a much more brutal and uncomfortable reality than most people ever imagined. So, what was it really like to sit inside one of these bumpy, bone-rattling carriages for days on end? And why has the dark side of stagecoach travel been hidden for so long? But before we dive in, if you love to explore the mysteries of forgotten history, untold stories, and the raw truth behind legendary times, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss what's coming next. Now, let's uncover the brutal reality of stagecoach travel. Stagecoach was not just a means of traveling, it was torment. When people think of stagecoach travel in the Old West, they often imagine something exciting or full of adventure. A strong driver holding the reins, horses galloping over wide-open land, and passengers enjoying the view. Well, that is Hollywood's version. The truth is that in real life, riding a stagecoach was one of the most painful, tiring, and risky ways to travel. It didn't feel like a trip. It felt like survival. The stagecoach itself was part of the problem. These vehicles didn't have the springs we have today. Instead, the box where people sat was held up by thick leather straps called thoroughbraces. These straps let the coach swing side to side like a hanging cradle. The idea was that this would absorb the shock from rough roads. But it didn't work well. Every time the coach hit a rock, dropped into a hole, or bounced over roots, your whole body felt it. And as for the roads, they weren't really roads at all. Just dirt trails, full of holes, mud, and stones. When it rained, they turned into deep muck. When it was dry, dust covered everything. Going uphill meant slowing to a crawl. Going downhill meant hanging on tight and hoping the brakes held. For instance, when Mark Twain, who traveled by stagecoach across the West in 1861, described the journey as an imposing cradle on wheels, referring to the constant swaying that left many passengers seasick. Twain wasn't exaggerating. Inside the coach, 6 to 9 people were packed into a space smaller than the back of a van. There were 3 rows of seats, and if you were unlucky, you sat in the middle seat, often called the coffin. It had no back support, no place to lean, and no view. You were stuck between 2 strangers with your knees jammed against the row in front of you. Now imagine sitting like that for 12 to 16 hours a day, sometimes for days. There was no way to stretch your legs, lie down, or even turn sideways. And you didn't get to choose who you sat next to. You might be beside a stranger who snored, smelled, or carried live animals. And as for the smell, it was a serious problem. Most people didn't bathe often, and the hot, dusty conditions made things worse. By midday, the inside of the coach was full of sweat, dust, and body odor. Some passengers brought rags soaked in vinegar or peppermint oil just to hold to their noses and breathe without gagging. This particular smell got another traveler in the 1870s. So uncomfortable, she wrote about it in her journal. Her name was Isabella Bird, an Englishwoman who rode stagecoaches through Colorado while documenting everything she saw. She didn't hold back. After one ride, she described the passengers as people that were dusty and often smelling, making it very difficult to stay around them. Bird wasn't alone in her opinion. That wasn't a rare reaction. That was the normal result of riding in one of these things. Bird also wrote that many women tried to avoid drinking water during the trip just to avoid having to relieve themselves. That's because bathroom breaks were rare. Riders on top of the coach had it even worse. They were exposed to sun, wind, rain, and the risk of falling off. And if the coach hit a bad bump or took a sharp turn, people on the roof sometimes got thrown off. Injuries and even deaths were not unusual. Stagecoach travel also caused motion sickness. The constant moving and bumping made many people nauseous. Some vomited during the ride, others simply endured it in silence. By the time the coach reached the next stop, passengers didn't walk off, they stumbled out. Their legs were numb, their backs were sore, and their faces were covered in dirt. And that was just one leg of the journey. Traveling across states could take days or even weeks depending on the weather and road conditions. But even worse than the ride itself was everything that came with it. Because the moment the coach stopped moving, the real struggle began. So stay with us, because this is where things get more interesting. Robbers of the stagecoaches. Stagecoach travel wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous, and not just because of bumpy roads or tired horses. The real fear was the robbers. They were armed, bold, and usually waiting in the hills for just the right moment. You see, stagecoaches did not just carry people, they also transported gold, mail bags, bank money, and military payrolls. That made them rolling treasure chests, slow-moving targets that could be stopped with a single shot. So, robberies were common. In some parts of California, Nevada, and Arizona, they happened almost weekly. Bandits knew the routes, they knew the timing, and once a coach entered the right canyon or crossing, it was already too late. That's where the shotgun messenger came in. He sat next to the driver, holding a double-barreled shotgun, ready to shoot first and talk later. That's where the phrase, "riding shotgun," comes from. These men weren't there to smile or socialize. They were hired to protect the strongbox with their lives. But even a good shotgun man wasn't always enough. Take Black Bart, for example. His real name was Charles Bowles, and he was one of the most famous and strange stagecoach robbers in American history. Between 1875 and 1883, he robbed at least 28 Wells Fargo coaches across California and Oregon. But here comes the twist. He didn't use violence. He wore a long coat, a flour sack over his head, with holes cut for his eyes, and often left behind poems at the scene. But he was no joke. He once robbed a coach near Copperopolis, California, taking several $1,000s in gold. The driver said Bart appeared calm, collected, and completely in control. James B. Hume spent years trying to catch him. When they finally did, in 1883, they recovered only part of the loot. The rest was never found. Black Bart served time and then disappeared, his final fate still a mystery. Then there was Rattlesnake Dick, Richard Barter, a California outlaw known for his failed gold heist in the Sierra Nevada in 1856. He and his gang robbed a stage near Shasta, targeting a shipment carrying $80,000 in gold. But the gang got split up and only a small portion was recovered. Barter was later found shot to death in the hills, his share of the treasure never found. Not all bandits were so colorful. Some were brutal and deadly, like the gang that robbed the stage near Pioche, Nevada, in 1877. They wore flour sacks over their faces, ambushed the coach at a narrow bend, and shot the driver without warning. They stole the strongbox and left the passengers stranded in the desert. No one was ever arrested. The coach company simply sent a replacement, and the route continued. Another case involved Tom Bell, one of the first known stagecoach robbers in California. He led a failed robbery in 1856, targeting a coach believed to carry gold near Marysville. The plan went wrong. A woman passenger was killed during the gunfire, and public anger boiled over. Bell was captured by a posse and hanged by vigilantes, a reminder that robbing a stage didn't just carry legal risks, it carried mob justice. Because of all this, passengers were constantly on edge. Drivers scanned the parameters carefully. Shotgun messengers kept their fingers close to the trigger. Some passengers even carried small weapons, just in case. Others tried hiding valuables in their boots or under their clothes. But it didn't always work. Bandits often searched everyone, and if someone was caught hiding money, they might be beaten or worse. And here's the part most people forget. Even after a robbery, the coach kept going. The driver might be replaced. A report might be filed, but the mail still had to move. The gold had to be delivered. And as for the passengers, even though they might still be shaken, sore, and sometimes missing luggage, still had miles to go. That's how things worked out west. There were no armored trucks, no rescue squads, just a man, a box, and a shotgun pointed at the wind. Stagecoach travel wasn't just about holding on. It was about hoping the shadows didn't move and that the man behind the mask wasn't faster than the one beside you. Now, that was not all. Even more brutal was the cases of sexual harassment that came from these coaches. Curious to find out what really led to this inhuman behavior, don't go anywhere. Pit stops were rare and rough. Aside from the fact that stagecoaches were tight and uncomfortable, the places where they stopped, normally called the swing stations and home stations, were often worse. These stops were supposed to offer rest, food, and maybe a place to stretch. But the truth is that they added a whole new layer of suffering, especially for women. These swing stations were small sheds because they were built every 10 to 20 miles. They existed for one thing only, and that was changing horses fast. There were no bathrooms, no shelters, no real privacy. Just a stable, a dirt yard, and sometimes a tired ranch hand with a lantern. If passengers needed to relieve themselves, they had to walk into the bushes and hope no one followed. Then came the home stations. They usually stopped here every 40 to 60 miles. Now, in home stations, things were slightly better. Some had kitchens, some had beds. But some people wished they did not have those beds because they were not safe or clean. Aside from that, most of these home stations were rough wooden buildings with thin walls, no locks, and shared sleeping spaces. Some people slept in barns, others on the benches. There were no private rooms unless you paid extra, and even then, the walls barely kept sound out. So, when it was time to sleep, everyone crowded into whatever space was available. It didn't matter how many people there were or what gender they were. Men and women shared the same rooms, the same benches, even the same corners of the floor. And in that kind of setup, a lot of men took it as an opportunity to make bold and often unwanted advances on the women, sometimes leading to rape. And they normally succeeded because there were no security guards, no rules, no one to report to. This action was so threatening, and it happened enough that many women refused to travel alone. Some brought male relatives, others traveled only in groups, and some just endured it because they had no other choice. And this wasn't limited to the road. Inside the coach, there were no rules about space. People sat shoulder to shoulder for hours. There were no separate areas for women. If someone got handsy, or worse, it was hard to stop it. Although Masterson didn't record specific assaults, her diary is full of moments where women hoped no one stumbled into their space, or that drunken remarks in the dark wouldn't turn physical. She wrote about women drawing their blankets tighter or shifting their bodies away when a man slept too close, and that was often enough to make them feel unsafe. However, the worst part of all of these is that the companies didn't care. Their job was to deliver the mail, gold, or payroll. What happened to the passengers was not really their business. In fact, if someone spoke up, there was usually no action, no laws, no record. The stations themselves didn't offer protection either. The workers were mostly young ranch hands, ex-soldiers, or locals. Many were kind, some were not. And when alcohol was around, which was often, things got worse. In some cases, travelers were left behind at these stations, either by accident or on purpose. There are stories of women being left in remote outposts for hours or days, waiting for another coach. But not every coach ride involved abuse. Most passengers were just tired, dirty, and focused on getting where they were going. But the system was wide open for the wrong kind of person to take advantage, and every woman who traveled by stagecoach knew the risk. And here's the part that hits hardest. The food, for one, was barely edible. In swing stations, there was often no food at all. In home stations, you might get beans, bread, or bacon, but it wasn't the kind you'd want to write home about. One traveler said the beans still had sand in them, and the bacon smelled like old boots. Coffee, weak, bitter, and filled with grounds. You drank it because it was warm, not because it was good. As for the water, it wasn't safe either. If it hadn't been boiled, it could carry cholera, dysentery, or typhoid. Some passengers refused to drink at all, risking dehydration just to avoid getting sick. And when it came to sleep, they barely closed their eyes to sleep. You might be stuck sleeping on a bench, the floor, or out in the barn next to the horses. There were always noises, snoring travelers, restless animals, people arguing, or gunshots from a saloon not too far away. Some passengers got just 2 or 3 hours of real sleep before the coach horn blew again. And the worst part is that if you are not too quick to get up in the morning, the drivers will leave you behind. This is because they were paid to stick to the schedule. So, if a passenger took too long washing his or her face or lacing their boots, the coach might be gone by the time they get outside. It didn't matter if their bags were still inside. The coach rolled on, because out west, the wheels didn't wait for anyone. The road was the real enemy. If the station stops were brutal, the roads were even worse. Sometimes it felt like the road itself was trying to kill you. Stagecoach passengers didn't just suffer when they stopped. They suffered while moving, and not because of robbers or rude fellow travelers. This time it was the land itself that turned against them. Every mile came with a new risk: broken wheels, flooded rivers, rock slides, wild animals, or weather that could freeze your fingers or boil your blood on the same day. Most stagecoach routes weren't roads in the way we think of them today. They were barely marked trails, cut through open prairie, deserts, mountains, and forests, often carved out by wagon wheels and horse hooves, not by surveyors or road crews. The result of this was that it led to ruts, rocks, rivers, mud pits, and cliffs. Drivers had to guide 6 horses across narrow mountain passes with no guardrails, no pavement, and no room for error. One bad turn, one broken axle, or one scared horse, and the coach could go tumbling down a ravine. Some areas were so steep that passengers were forced to get out and walk, climbing beside the coach while the driver took the horses alone up the slope. If it was raining or icy, people slipped. If it was hot, they would be dehydrated. Even in flat country, the road was no friend. When it rained, the dirt turned to deep mud. Wheels sank, horses strained, and progress slowed to a crawl. Some coaches got stuck for hours or days. When that happened, passengers had to get out and push the coach forward, waist-deep in mud, just to keep going. Then there were rivers. Not every route had bridges. In fact, most didn't. If a river was shallow, the driver charged through it. If it was deep, passengers climbed out and waited while the driver guided the horses through. If the water rose too fast, it could sweep the coach downstream with everyone in it. Snow was worse. In the northern roads or in high-altitude areas like the Rockies or Sierra Nevada, blizzards were deadly. Roads disappeared under snowdrifts. Horses froze in their harnesses. Wheels locked up. In some cases, entire coaches vanished in snowstorms and were found days later with passengers inside, frozen to death. One famous story came out of the Donner Pass area. In 1871, a stagecoach stalled in a snowstorm with 6 passengers inside. The driver and shotgun messenger left to find help. They never returned. Days later, rescuers found the coach buried in snow. Only 1 passenger was still alive. But winter wasn't the only killer. Summer brought its own punishments, and this part you don't want to miss out on. In the desert routes, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Texas, the heat could be unforgiving. Inside the coach, it was like sitting in a sealed oven. No space for ventilation. The dust stuck to your skin. Water ran out fast. And if the coach broke down under the sun, you didn't wait long. You started walking. And walking through the desert wasn't survival. It was a gamble. Snakes, scorpions, wolves, and coyotes all roamed those roads. One writer from 1868 wrote that after their coach lost a wheel near the Pecos River, the passengers had to spend the night outside. They built a fire, stayed back to back, and listened to howling all night, praying no one wandered off. Now, if a passenger got injured during the journey, they were as good as dead. There were no hospitals, no ambulances, no medical help of any kind. So if someone twisted an ankle on the trail, broke a rib inside the coach, or collapsed from heat stroke, they had only one option: deal with it. Although some coaches carried basic medical kits, they were little more than bandages, a bottle of whiskey, and a prayer. The only real chance a passenger had was if there happened to be a doctor on board. If not, you suffered in silence. Many passengers rode with chronic pain or untreated injuries from earlier accidents, but they had no choice. The coach didn't wait for anyone. You either endured it or you got left behind. Passengers weren't just travelers. They were survivors. Every curve, every hill, every river crossing came with a question. Will we make it through this one? And even when the road seemed quiet, danger could come from above. Lightning storms, falling trees, dust storms, there were no shelters out there. Just you, your fellow passengers, a tired driver, and a coach held together by straps, nails, and stubbornness. People didn't take stagecoaches for adventure. They took them because they had no other way to get where they needed to go. High cost, low comfort. Now, for all that pain, suffering, and risk, one might think stagecoach travel came cheap. But it did not. A long-distance ticket could cost up to $200 back in the 1800s, which is the same as paying over $6,000 today. And for that price, you didn't get comfort. Passengers ended up with cramps, bruises, and maybe dysentery. Passengers were allowed just one small bag. If it didn't fit inside the coach, it got strapped to the top and risked falling off somewhere along the trail. Most people carried just the bare essentials: food rations, a change of clothes, and something for self-defense. Stagecoaches were not made for the rich, they were for the desperate, determined, or out of options. Wealthy folks rode trains. Everyone else gritted their teeth and climbed in. And here comes the shocker. Once a passenger paid for his transportation, that money didn't cover everything. Food at the stations cost extra. So did lodging. If the coach broke down, there were no refunds, no guarantees. You paid to survive the ride, and sometimes that alone was a miracle. So yes, stagecoach travel helped build the West. But make no mistake, it built it on the backs of people who paid top dollar just to suffer. So, what are your thoughts on the brutal reality of stagecoach travel? Could you have survived that ride across the Wild West, or would you have waited for the train? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories from history. And also remember to click the next video on your screen, because if you like this ride, you're going to love what's coming next.